For years, you believed a story, but what if I told you that everything you were told about Madeleine McCann was wrong? New revelations expose a shocking detail that could change everything. Do you remember the first time you heard about Madeleine McCann? She was a blonde little girl with light eyes, disappearing without a trace from a luxurious resort in Portugal. The news spread like wildfire, headlines in every newspaper, TV shows covering every detail, police investigations pouring in unbelievable resources. For years, this story was repeated over and over. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about this case might be wrong? From the beginning, the narrative was always clear: a kidnapping. An unidentified criminal enters the apartment where Madeleine was sleeping and takes her without anyone noticing. But there are pieces of this puzzle that never quite fit. Strange details that were ignored, abrupt changes in the investigation, and one crucial factor: the way the media controlled the whole story. What if the case wasn't exactly about a kidnapping? What if the truth had been right in front of us from the start, but was shaped so we believed something completely different? Get ready, because in the next revelations, you will realize that the investigation's mistakes, the contradictions in the testimonies, and even the role of the media might indicate that we were led to believe in something that never happened. And now I ask you, one of the biggest deceptions in history. If there is one thing history teaches us, it is that not every great tragedy happens the way it is told. Have you ever noticed that in some high-profile cases, the official version is rarely questioned? That happened with Madeleine McCann. Her disappearance received unprecedented media coverage. Thousands of children disappear every year. But how many of them do you remember by name? Madeleine's case was treated as something exceptional. But why? Here's the part that almost no one talks about. At the moment her parents reported the disappearance, the crime scene was already compromised. People had come and gone from the apartment before any forensic work was done. Police officers and journalists stepped on what could have been a crucial piece of the investigation. Any trace that might have indicated what really happened was erased. But what if I told you that the biggest mistake was not only the police failure, but the way the case was handled immediately afterward? The idea of a kidnapping was immediately publicized, without other hypotheses being seriously analyzed. But was that narrative convenient for someone? This case has something many others did not: the interference of power and influence. From the beginning, Madeleine McCann was not treated as just another victim of a disappearance. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were received by the Pope, had meetings with British ministers, and received financial support from celebrities and high-level politicians. Have you ever seen another case of a missing child handled in that way? Meanwhile, the Portuguese investigation began to show glaring failures. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Accounts were altered, and the strangest of all, when the Portuguese police began questioning the girl's own parents, the narrative changed completely. The investigator in charge of the case, Gonçalo Amaral, stated that there were clear indications that Madeleine might never have left that apartment alive. Sniffer dogs detected the smell of blood and a cadaveric odor in the area, and in the rental car the McCanns used weeks after the disappearance. But as soon as this theory started to gain strength, Amaral was removed from the case, and the media returned in full force to promote the kidnapping version. If the truth did not matter to those controlling the narrative, then who was benefiting from this story? Every year, new investigations are carried out, suspects are interrogated, and no definitive answer is found. But what if the answer had already been given, but was ignored? Imagine a case where all the evidence points down one path, yet the media insists on showing another. That's how the Madeleine McCann case became one of the most emblematic in the world. One day, newspapers pointed out flaws in the investigation, and the next they declared a new suspect. The focus shifted, always keeping attention away from the McCanns. Now think about how many other cases could have received the same treatment. Does the truth really matter when much bigger interests are at stake? The Madeleine case is not just a mystery. It may be a clear example of manipulation. But then, if all of this is true, why do we still not have a definitive answer? The answer may lie in clues that were ignored, testimonies that never received due attention, and one crucial detail that could change everything. In the next few minutes, we are going to analyze the evidence that might expose what really happened. Imagine the scene. Months have passed since Madeleine McCann's disappearance. The media covers every detail. Kidnapping theories emerge. International searches are organized. The whole world wants answers. But then something changes drastically. The Portuguese police, which until then had followed the kidnapping narrative, start considering another possibility. What if Madeleine never left that apartment alive? The first indications appear with the use of sniffer dogs trained to detect the odor of corpses and human blood. They are taken to the apartment where Madeleine disappeared. What happens next shocks even the investigators themselves. The dogs indicate the presence of a death smell in the room where Madeleine slept. But the most frightening detail arises when the dogs are taken to the rental car used by the McCanns weeks after the disappearance. The same odor is detected in the trunk. That changes everything. If Madeleine had been kidnapped, how could the smell of a body be present in the rental car weeks after her disappearance? By this time, the Portuguese police begin treating the girl's own parents as suspects. But surprisingly, before they could advance the investigation, something unexpected happens. The media narrative changes. British newspapers, which before portrayed the McCanns as victims, now defend them even more forcefully. Reporters who question the new evidence, who was leading this new line of inquiry, is removed from the case. Why? If the evidence was there, if the sniffer dogs had indicated the presence of a body in the family car, why was the investigation halted? Could it be that the answer bothered someone too powerful? Here enters a phenomenon that occurs in many high-profile cases: the way the media can shape public perception. From the very start, Madeleine's disappearance was treated as an exceptional crime. British politicians offered immediate support to the McCanns. The couple received top-notch legal help. Millions were raised for the searches. But as soon as the Portuguese police began suspecting the parents, everything changed. The British press coverage ignored the new evidence and reverted to reinforcing the kidnapping idea. This is the so-called framing effect. When a story becomes too big to change, it is easier to maintain the initial version than to accept new discoveries. Accepting that the McCanns could be involved would be such a huge shock for the public that it simply could not be allowed. And here's another strange detail. The McCann family refused to take a polygraph test. If they were so willing to cooperate, why not do something so simple? Moreover, investigator Gonçalo Amaral wrote a book called The Truth of the Lie, in which he exposed details of the case and stated that the Portuguese police had concrete evidence that Madeleine was never taken by a kidnapper. The result? The McCanns sued Amaral and tried to prevent the book's publication. If everything he wrote was false, why go to such lengths to silence him? At this point, the most disturbing question arises. Did the truth bother so much that it was suppressed? If the media and political power were protecting the kidnapping narrative, who really had an interest in hiding what happened that night? The clues were there, but the world was led to look the other way. When a child disappears, investigation protocols tend to follow a relatively predictable pattern. The local police take over the case, investigate all possibilities, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. But with Madeleine McCann's disappearance, something very different happened. The British government intervened directly from the beginning, something that rarely happens in cases of missing children outside of the United Kingdom. The obvious question is, why? The British government's involvement in the case began almost immediately. British diplomats were sent to Portugal within hours to advise the McCanns. The UK Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, made direct calls to Portuguese authorities, pressuring them on how the case was being handled. No other case of a missing child received this kind of direct governmental attention. While hundreds of children disappear every year, why did this particular case mobilize so many influential people? But the interference did not stop there. When the Portuguese police started considering hypotheses other than kidnapping, such as an accident inside the apartment and a possible cover-up, the tone of the British media changed drastically. Portuguese journalists reporting alternative versions began to suffer pressure. Headlines were modified, and British tabloids started attacking the Portuguese police, portraying them as incompetent and disorganized. Then came the final blow. Gonçalo Amaral, the lead investigator of the case, was removed. Amaral had led the line of inquiry that pointed out inconsistencies in the McCann's version and in witness testimonies. Not only was he taken off the case, but his career was destroyed. He was sued and suffered massive media attacks. After being removed, Amaral published a book called The Truth of the Lie, in which he detailed the failures and pressures he experienced. He suggested that the investigation was compromised to protect the McCanns, or someone even more powerful. The book was immediately targeted by censorship and lawsuits. The McCanns filed a suit to ban it, and he was forced to pay a huge settlement. Why would an innocent family go to such lengths to prevent an investigator from publishing his conclusions? In addition, the McCanns had access to highly specialized lawyers from the very start. Even before being officially treated as suspects, they already had legal defense that any ordinary person could never afford. Millions of pounds were raised for the family's private investigation, including donations from influential businessmen and even celebrities. If they were just parents searching for their daughter, why did they need such a strong legal defense? This leads us to another even more disturbing question. Was Madeleine's disappearance just an isolated case, or was it linked to something much bigger? If there is one thing that history teaches us, it's that what makes the headlines is are used as distractions to take attention away from something bigger. In 2007, when Madeleine disappeared, the United Kingdom was facing a series of scandals involving corruption, abuse of power, and political crises. One of the biggest scandals at the time involved members of Parliament and the British police, who were under investigation for corruption and financial irregularities. Journalists were already beginning to reveal compromising documents about influential political figures. But then, Madeleine McCann's disappearance became the UK's main news story, dominating headlines for months. The coverage was massive. Special reports, interviews with experts, TV crews sent to Portugal, everything revolved around the case. It was impossible to open a newspaper or turn on the TV without hearing about Madeleine. This level of attention was so disproportionate that it began to raise suspicions. Why was a case of a missing child receiving more coverage than issues that impacted an entire nation? It wouldn't be the first time that a major tragedy was used to divert public attention. And here's an even more intriguing detail: the involvement of certain powerful figures connected to the McCann case. We know that the McCanns received legal and financial support from influential people, but some of these individuals had connections with controversial figures, including names associated with child abuse scandals that were already under investigation in the United Kingdom. Does this mean that Madeleine was a victim of something much larger, possibly linked to a criminal network? Or were these same figures using the case to manipulate the narrative and protect their own interests? Whatever the answer, what we know is that there was an enormous effort to ensure that only one version of the story was told. The British media not only blindly supported the McCann's version, but also attacked anyone who dared to suggest another hypothesis. The kidnapping was treated as an absolute fact, even with forensic evidence, contradictory testimonies, and investigations indicating that other possibilities should be explored. When a story needs to be protected with such determination, it usually means one thing: someone has a lot to lose if the truth is discovered. The big question is, was the truth about Madeleine McCann hidden only to protect her parents? Or does this story cover up something even darker? In the end, when you control the narrative, you control the truth. For years, the whole world followed the Madeleine McCann case, believing in a single version of the facts. The media repeated the same story countless times: a mysterious kidnapping, desperate parents, and a global search for a missing child. But as the investigations progressed, uncomfortable questions began to emerge. The Portuguese police raised doubts. Experts pointed out inconsistencies. Sniffer dogs indicated evidence that didn't match the official narrative. And yet, the kidnapping version continued to be promoted as the only possibility. This brings us to an essential question: why were certain pieces of information ignored? If the media truly cared about the truth, why not explore all possibilities instead of insisting on just one? The involvement of the British government, the pressure to close the investigation on Madeleine's parents, the removal of Gonçalo Amaral, and the media attack against any hypothesis that deviated from the kidnapping. All this points to something much bigger than a simple mistake in handling the case. When a crime is so fiercely protected by external forces, it usually means that there is something or someone powerful that must be shielded at any cost. If Madeleine McCann's disappearance were a common case, would it have received the same level of interference? Would the world have been bombarded with daily headlines about every little detail? Or was there a moment when this case stopped being just about a missing girl and began to serve much larger interests? The media wields immense power in shaping perceptions. What we believe to be true is often nothing more than a strategically constructed version to serve a purpose. And in this case, what really happened may never have been the priority of the official narrative. Even after all these years, there remain points that are still unexplained. Why are there no clear images of Madeleine leaving the resort? Who ensured that the McCanns had access to such powerful lawyers even before being treated as suspects? Why did witnesses give inconsistent testimonies and yet were taken seriously? Why were some pieces of evidence never examined with the proper attention? If the intention was always to find Madeleine and uncover the truth, then why do so many pieces of this puzzle seem to be deliberate? But if there is no interest in revealing it, it will remain buried under the version we were told. If one day the truth comes to light, if Madeleine McCann is still alive, will she ever have the chance to tell her own story? And if she isn't, will we ever know what really happened on that night in May 2007? Perhaps the answer has already been found, and we were just not allowed to see it. Perhaps we will never know the whole truth, or maybe it is waiting to be discovered by someone who refuses to accept only what has been told. If you've come this far, you know that this case is far from simple. So tell me, what do you really think happened to Madeleine McCann? Was the truth hidden forever? Leave your opinion in the comments. I really want to know what you think. And if you like controversial investigations and unsolved mysteries, subscribe to the channel because the next video might surprise you even more. Now click on the next video because there is one little discussed detail in this case that could completely change what you believe.